Those of you who still believe the oral tradition is true and you just can't fathom that it wouldn't be true, open your heart for a second, because I was also Haredi. I was originally, my story is that I was originally just a regular Jew from England, and then I went to yeshiva for about 6 or 7 years, and I learned and I became Haredi. Here's my white shirt behind me. And I was very, very strong and very innocent, and everything I learned I did. And the truth is, I really believed that the oral tradition was real, and I had proof and I understood all of the concepts why we need an oral tradition, because without it you wouldn't be able to do any mitzvot, because you need the explanations for each mitzvah. And all of these things I actually understood, to the point where I reached a point where I opened a YouTube channel called Da Mala Shivla Apikoros, Know What to Answer a Person who doesn't believe in the oral tradition. And my channel was designed to answer the questions of all these apikosim, and they do have questions, people that don't believe in the oral tradition. And so I used to create videos on this channel here, what you're seeing right now, and I used to respond to their kashas, to their difficulties, actually very well. You can go down and just see those videos. They still exist, believe it or not. I haven't actually removed all of them. And so over there I would respond to them and show them that the oral tradition is real. Until at one point I discovered that I myself was wrong. There's certain things that you just can't answer, and then you realize perhaps you yourself are wrong. Now, in general, we always have a stance. Everyone has a stance. Like either you are what, a leftist or a right wing, or you could be, you know what I mean? You put yourself in a box. So if you're in the box of Haredi or religious because of Torah Sheba'al Peh, you're in that box. So to get out of it is very, very difficult. It took me like 3 months just to digest the fact that the oral tradition might not be true. So I'm now a year in, roughly. So I'm a little bit more calm about it. I can speak in a more calm and collected way. I'm not emotional about it. So let me give you some proof. So this is how I came to the conclusion that the oral tradition is actually not true. So for me, I myself, I mean, looking at the oral tradition, no matter what angle you come from, you'll figure out that it's sadly not the truth. And I'll show you what I mean. If you come from a perspective of science and the religion, meaning all of the things that Chazal say when they talk about science, how long it takes for like a lion to give birth, or can lice create themselves, or do they need a partner, for example, all of these questions that Chazal asks, they got them all wrong. Now, if you relate to the oral tradition as a holy book, the Talmud Bavli, if you relate to it as a holy book, how can it be that they don't even know that lice don't generate themselves? Rather, they need a spouse, just like humans do. And if they don't know that, and then so obviously there's going to be answers to these questions, like perhaps the lice back then used to not need a spouse. All of these answers are just answers. If we just say lice is lice, then Chazal are wrong. But you have to just keep giving answers, and that's my problem. So if this was the only problem, that the Talmud Bavli doesn't match with modern science, that would be fine. I would still be Haredi. The problem is, if you look at the history of those who wrote the Talmud Bavli, you'll find that they're actually a group of people called the Prushim. Now, the name Prushim isn't so complimentary to a group of people who want to do something good for the nation. Like, Prushim means they literally left. Like you'd say Chilonim of today, Prushim back then was the people who were not religious. The people who were religious back then were Kohanei Beit Tzadok, what the Prushim would call Tzedukim. Now, they gave them a nickname which would sound a bit negative, like Tzedukim, you know what I mean? But really, the real evil ones, in my opinion, is the Prushim, because the Prushim came and took away the leadership of the Tzedukim, the Kohanei Beit Tzadok. Now, the amazing thing is, if you look in the Nach, you'll find Tzadok and Kohanei Beit Tzadok written in the Nach. This is way before Chazal came along. This is in Nach. In the books of Nach, you'll find Tzadok. Meaning, Kohanei Beit Tzadok were the original Kohens, the ones who were Mesharet, were doing the work and the service in the Beit HaMikdash. So to come along and take away their leadership is an act of absolute, criminal. And so that's what the Prushim did. Now, if you look at the history, you will find that. Now, these same Prushim are the ones that wrote the Torah Sheba'al Peh. So the question is, how did they come into power, and how did they do it? And if you look into the story, you'll find that they actually joined forces with the Greeks in order to overturn the power. And the people of power were the Tzedukim. They were Kohanei Tzadok. They were the judges, the Shoftim, which is what the Torah asks. It asks that only Kohanim can be Shoftim. Only the Kohanim can serve in the Beit HaMikdash. But then come along this group of Prushim. They join up with the Greeks, and they overturn the leadership. And how did that work? So basically, the real problem, why this all started, was because originally the Torah Shebichtav, if you look at the Torah Shebichtav, all of the dates are from the sun, meaning the sun used to decide the yearly cycle of the Jewish calendar. So basically, there used to be a yearly calendar based on the sun and not the moon, so that every Chag would fall on the same day. Yom Kippur would always fall on Shabbat. Other Chagim would always fall on Wednesdays, and this was an amazing calendar, which is even better than the one that we have today. The calendar of the original Kohanei Tzadok, the Luach HaShimshi, is written in Sefer Chanoch, and just in brackets, the Prushim decided to throw away all of this proof. They threw it in Megillot Qumran. They buried all of this information so that we wouldn't be able to trace back the original calendar. But unfortunately for them, about 50 years ago, these books, Megillot Qumran, were uncovered and unburied. And so if you look inside them, you'll find a lot of these texts. Now, interestingly enough, one of the texts has, I think it's Pirkei Tehillim, 364 prakim, one for each day of the year, of the service of the Beit HaMikdash. Now, 364 days of the year. Now, remember, the lunar calendar, which is with the moon, has only about 270, I can't remember exactly, but it doesn't fit with the calendar of the Jewish calendar, and this idea of having 364 prakim proves that the year used to be 364 days. But Chazal, who are the Prushim, buried these books in order so that we would never know that there was such a thing as a calendar. And so I know I'm a bit scattered, but let me just try and get it into step. So we talked about the fact that scientifically Chazal fall apart. So if it's a holy book, then it's falling apart just from the science. That's all wrong. So let's talk about the history maybe of the people who wrote it. So they are a bunch of criminals who basically overturned the actual group of people who were chosen by God. Now, if you look at the actual content, you'll see they changed the calendar, and they changed the way they interpret psukim is completely out of bounds. Meaning they take a pasuk that says something literally, and they literally mefarish the opposite. I'll give an example. Like, for example, tzitzit. The pasuk says, "Take your vasulayim tzitzit al kanfei bigdehem." On your clothing, put yourself tzitzit, and vasulayim ptil tchelet. So it says you should put one ptil tchelet. It doesn't say anything else about ptilim. So come along Chazal and say, no, you don't need one ptil tchelet. You need 4 ptilim or 8 ptilim, and basically not one. But if you look at the pasuk itself, it says ptil tchelet. There's only one ptil in the pasuk. And it doesn't matter which mitzvah you bring to me. Write in the comments below any mitzvah you want, and I'll show you how the Prushim have changed it to something else. And the reason why they wanted to change a calendar, by the way, going back to the calendar so badly, is because the Greek army that came told the Prushim, listen guys, if you want to overturn this government, which is the Kohanei Tzadok, you need to change from a calendar that's going according to the sun to a calendar according to the moon. And the reason why they did this is actually quite an amusing story. The ruler of the Greeks had a birthday on the first of the month, and he celebrated his birthday every month, not every year. Like all of us have a birthday once a year, this guy celebrated his birthday once a month, and on his birthday he wanted everyone to pay taxes on the same day. And because of that, he wanted the Jews to also follow the same calendar, because if they followed the sun, then they wouldn't be able to remember his birthday every month. And that's why he wanted to make the Jews follow a lunar calendar. And so the Prushim agreed. The Tzadukim didn't agree. The Kohanei Tzadok didn't agree to change a calendar from the sun to the moon. And the reason why they didn't agree is because it's asr. The pasuk says, "Ele moadei Adonai mikraei kodesh asher tikru otam b'moadam." You need to do the Chagim exactly on the right day, which is based on the sun. And come along Chazal and change that. They actually made it so you go according to the moon, which is insane and like impossible. How could you even do such a thing? And the funny thing is that in the pasuk it says, the pasuk itself, which talks about doing things on the right day, Chazal come along and say, "Al tikru otam b'moadam." Don't read it that you have to do them on the right day. Read it atem b'moadam. You can decide the day that they will be running on. So instead of giving God the authority of deciding the day that we do the Chagim, we, Chazal or Prushim, are going to take the authority, and you can now decide when the Chagim are. Which is absolutely insane, because the pasuk in the plain reading is that you decide when, that God decides when the days of the Chagim are going to be, and that just makes sense as well. So moving on to another point, the Torah says, "Lo tosif velo tigra mikol asher ni'amarti." Like God says, don't add and don't remove any mitzvot from the Torah. So if you do add anything, you're basically doing something wrong. Now, interestingly enough, Chazal added many mitzvot, but the truth is that's not really a big problem for Chazal, and the reason why is because Chazal don't define that pasuk as adding more mitzvot. They define it as making one mitzvah bigger. For example, Chazal say, don't take a chag that's 8 days and make it 10 days. Don't take a chag that's 1 day and make it 2 days. That's the pshat according to Chazal. But if you look at the pasuk itself, it says, "Et kol mitzvah asher ani omer lecha hayom lo tosif alav." If you read the pshat with a very innocent reading, you'll see that the pasuk is saying, don't add more mitzvot. So Chazal are the ones that explain that pasuk to mean that you can't take one mitzvah and extend it. And the weirdest thing about this is that Chazal themselves made mitzvahs longer. They took Rosh Hashanah and made it 2 days. Even in Israel, Rosh Hashanah is 2 days. When they themselves said, don't extend mitzvot past what you're allowed to, they themselves tell you, oh, by the way, you better do that. And in Chutz La'aretz, you have to do 2 days of Yom Tov, even though the Torah itself says 1 day. So they are making you do the Issur according to what they think. But you needn't worry, because the Torah itself is referring to adding more mitzvot on the actual mitzvot that you have. If you read the pasuk, which talks about lo tosif velo tigra, if you actually go and read it, you'll see it's talking about lo tosif al kol mitzvah, meaning the mitzvot as a list of things, don't add to that list more mitzvot. But Chazal did do that, and they added Issur d'oraisas, not derabbanans, d'oraisas. For example, they added with lo tevashel gdi b'chalev imo. The pasuk says, don't cook a gdi in its mother's milk, and that makes a lot of sense. Like, that's the mitzvah. The mitzvah is don't take the milk that was designed and determined to be used for this specific animal, and then give it to and then use that to cook the animal. It's a bit warped. It's similar to the mitzvah of lo tachorosh shor v'chamor yachdav. Don't take an ox and I forgot the ox and the sheep, whatever, and don't make them work together, because obviously the shor is much stronger and the sheep is much weaker. So don't put them together, because it's just weird. The same thing applies to shatnez. Don't use wool and linen together. Wool is heating, linen is cooling. Don't do them together, because if you put them together, it's warped. Kilo, you're weird. What are you doing? Just be straight. Be a straight person. Don't take heat and cold fabrics and sew them together. Like, it's just warped. The same thing applies to gays. God says, lo yishkav ish mishkav isha. And also similarly it says, lo yekli gever al isha velo tilvash ish simlat isha. Like, don't be warped, basically. All these similar mitzvahs are very similar. But then Chazal come along with regards to the meat and milk and say, oh, no, it is, even though it says lo tevashel gdi b'chalev imo, since it's written 3 times in the Torah, one of them is going to be for cooking, one of them is going to be for eating, and one of them is going to be, I forgot the third one right now, Hana, can't remember. Basically, the point is that Chazal took, just from the fact that it's written more than once, they took that mitzvah and then made it like more mitzvot, meaning they added on the Torah, and these are called, some of these are called d'oraisa. Now, interestingly enough, Chazal also instituted tefillah. Tefillah, davening there was no such thing as davening before the destruction of the second temple. And the funny thing is that when they were looking for a pasuk to asmachta them, to give them the authority to create mitzvah d'oraisa, they couldn't find one. They couldn't find a Torah source that requires you to daven. The best they could do is find the pasuk which says, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווה אתכם היום על לבבכם. איזוהי עבודה שבלב, זוהי תפילה. Now the funny thing is, that pasuk is talking about keeping the mitzvahs in your heart. והיו הדברים האלה, these things I just said, על לבבכם. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווה אתכם היום, these things I'm giving you commandments, על לבבכם. The mitzvahs should be in your heart. And so it's not talking about tefillah or kriyat shema, it's talking about the mitzvot. Meaning God's very clear that He wants the mitzvahs to be on our hearts. Meaning never forget the mitzvot. God wants that. Come along Chazal, they couldn't find a better pasuk. They couldn't. They looked everywhere in Torah and Nach. They couldn't find anything. The only thing they found which they could is Vayu dvarim ha'ele Hashem tzaveh al levavchem. And that mitzvah is b'chalal kashur le mitzvahs. It's nothing to do with tefillah. And so they come and institute at least one mitzvah d'oraisa of tefillah when there is no such thing. So that's already Baal Tosif. They were over on Baal Tosif without flinching an eye, nothing.